Hi, I'm going to try to document the repair of a strange problem with a Vox AD50VT guitar amp. This is a picture of an AD50VT that belongs to a friend of mine in work. It has been what he calls Voxified by removing the horrible chrome grille and replacing it with black Vox grill cloth, adding white edge piping, and adding a horizontal accent silver bar. This is a huge improvement in the appearance of the amp. Anyway, he purchased it used on eBay, played it for a while, and then stored it in a cold basement. After sitting for a year or so, he attempted to use it and found that it had developed an unusual problem, a very loud pulsating noise that you'll hear when I power up the amp. I can set the gain control at 0, the volume control at 0, the master volume control at 0, and the power level control on the back of the amp to 0 and have no change in the pulsating sound. In case this isn't coming through well on the video, that is a very loud, deep, maybe 100 cycle or so frequency pulse. I then removed the vacuum tube, and there was still no change to the pulsing sound. I'll now show you a clue as to what the problem might be. By tapping the rear power control, I can change the speed of the pulse. This leads me to believe that the problem is something mechanical in the power control circuit, possibly the control itself or a bad solder connection on the circuit board. This was caused most likely by something hitting the power control. I found a schematic online for an AD30VT that is very close to what's in an AD50VT. This power control, right here, has two potentiometers on a single shaft. It varies the gain on a pair of op amps that then control two attenuators to decrease the power going to the speaker. This control allows reducing the volume without affecting the tone that was developed by the placement of the gain control, the volume control, and the master control. Be sure to turn the power switch off and remove the AC power cord from the chassis before you try to remove the chassis from the amplifier case. I removed the chassis from the amplifier cabinet and am going to have to remove this circuit board from the chassis in order to be able to get at the power level control because it's soldered to this circuit board. To do that, I'm going to have to remove these two screws which hold the heatsink for the power output IC and these four screws. Whenever you remove screws from a chassis or anything, you should always be careful to make sure that you know where each screw goes so you can reassemble it properly. If you look, the screws that go into the standoffs on the other side of the chassis are different from the screws that go into the heatsink. To completely remove the chassis, you'll also have to take the nut on the power level control off. You'll have to remove the nut on the foot switch, which is plastic. remove the nut on the line phone and the nut on the external speaker out. This will now allow you to remove the circuit board from the chassis. I first tried spraying deoxit contact cleaner into the power control. This is, in my opinion, the best contact cleaner available, and it should be because it is very expensive. Unfortunately, it had no effect on the problem, and when you're spraying contact cleaners, you have to be sure that you actually get it into the interior of the control. So you have to be sure that you find an opening in the control that you can spray into. I closely inspected the soldering around where the power level control is inserted into the circuit board. I was looking for any obviously bad solder joints or cold solder joints, and I didn't see any, but in any event, I touched up the existing solder joints with a soldering iron and fresh solder on the contacts around the power control. Unfortunately, there was no change. I then decided that the power control potentiometer was probably bad, so I needed to replace it. This was easier said than done. My favorite parts supplier is Newark Electronics at newark.com. I searched their huge online catalog for a long time and could not come up with a replacement for a dual gang 100K ohm linear taper printed circuit board mounted potentiometer. That is quite a spec. I called their helpline, and the sales rep could not find anything either. She then called in an engineer, and he couldn't find anything, but said that I could make a special order from a particular manufacturer, but I would have to buy at least 100. Well, I only need one, so I continued the search. I tried a second very large parts distributor, Mouser Electronics, at Mouser.com. I got exactly the same story. They had nothing, but I could have it specially made. Well, I started to worry that I wasn't going to find this part anywhere. Then I thought to look on eBay, and unexpectedly, I actually found it available from a seller in Hong Kong, a Louis, Louis, Liu, one word, 2009. I wound up ordering 2 of them just in case. Here's what the new control looks like. Notice that there are 6 contacts. Each set of 3 is a single potentiometer, so you can see that there are 2 potentiometers on this single shaft. That's what makes this part so hard to find. Also, the fact that it is not mounted on a chassis, but it is soldered directly into the circuit board, and that's what these spikes are here for. This is a little tip that you really need to know about. This is a product that is just generically known as solder wick, and it's a braid with flux in it so that it will actually absorb solder when the solder and the braid are heated. This stuff is great for getting the solder off of old parts and leaving a clean area in which to insert the new part. Just one thing, be careful not to apply too much heat to a circuit board, because you can lift the copper pads from the board and you'll have a heck of a time getting things back together. I'm not going to bore you by videoing the actual replacement of the control, because it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to heat the solder, remove it with the solder wick, and put the new control in place and solder it. So I'll be back when all that's done. Okay, the new potentiometer has been soldered into the circuit board. I put the circuit board back in the chassis, and I've put the chassis back into the guitar amp case. And it's time for the test. Let's power it up and see if we hear any more of that thumping. Okay, this will take a second to warm up because there is a vacuum tube in here. It's a pretty small one, but it still takes a few seconds for it to power up. and I think you can hear that there is no thumping sound anymore. I can go over here to the power level control, and I can wiggle that. I can try to move it around, and there's absolutely no sound whatsoever from that. Looks like my guess was correct, that potentiometer was bad, and by taking out the bad one and putting in a new one, it seems like we've cured this problem. Okay, let's see what this thing sounds like. Well, seems to sound just fine. I think my friend's going to be very happy when he gets this thing back.